In this chapter, we're talking about genes within populations. This whole semester, we've talked about the great variety of life we share this planet with, all the different unique types of organisms. So in this chapter, we can talk about how this diversity arose in the first place and how it's maintained over time at the population and the species level. Genetic variation refers to the differences in allele frequencies of genes found within individuals in a population. Natural populations tend to have a lot of variation, and that variation gives us the raw material for natural selection. Evolution equals a change in a species over generations. More simply, it's just change over time. And that term is associated with Darwin, but he actually never used the word evolution. Instead, he coined the phrase descent with modification. He said that through time, species accumulate differences, and as a result, descendants differ from their ancestors. In this way, new species can arise from existing ones. Right? So change over time. Again, Charles Darwin is very closely associated with that term evolution. At the time he was active, there was actually quite a few theories and ideas about how species change over time. Right? His main rival theory was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who proposed the inheritance of acquired characteristics idea, which states that changes in individuals are acquired throughout their lives, and then those changes are passed down to their offspring. The textbook example, and I'll come right back to this slide, but the textbook example is the giraffe, right? So there's an ancestral giraffe that's kind of like an okapi, which is a short-necked giraffe, basically. Ancestral giraffes with short necks stretched out their necks over the course of their lifetimes in order to reach leaves on high branches, and then by the time that giraffe had offspring, that trait of a longer neck was passed down to its offspring, right? So, I mean, this would be really convenient because this means if I was born terrible at math and over the course of my lifetime I worked really hard at being able to be good at math, then my offspring would be better at math. Right? But unfortunately, this is not how it works. So going back to this slide, what differentiated Darwin from the people around him and from his predecessors that were already thinking about changes in species was the mechanism. He proposed a mechanism, an actual way by which change could occur. He called this mechanism natural selection. Right, in his seminal book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. He came up with this idea as he was working as a naturalist on board the Beagle, which took what was supposed to be a 2.5-year, but what turned out to be a 5-year trip all over the globe. He was able to observe the variation he saw in all the diverse species in these different locations. And he also was able to see that species shared similarities with other nearby species. So this got him thinking, and it did take him a while, but these observations formed the basis for natural selection. So what does natural selection mean? It means that individuals with superior or better adapted physical or behavioral characteristics are more likely to survive and to reproduce than those without those characteristics. So, in other words, individuals that are better fit to their environment are going to live longer and have more babies, and those babies will have the traits their parents had, those advantageous traits that their parents had. So over time, if you watch this population, the characteristics that are advantageous will increase in that population over other less advantageous characteristics. So Darwin was stating basically that variation in populations came from pre-existing genetic differences among individuals, not experience, as Lamarck proposed. So this is Darwin's theory of natural selection, right? Some individuals just are born with longer necks than other individuals, and because of that longer neck, these individuals are going to live longer and have more offspring. Those offspring are going to resemble their long-necked parents, so over time, this population is going to have more long-necked individuals. To study how evolution works, we can look at the population. Evolution works at the population level. So we have population genetics, the study of the properties of genes within a population. Evolution results from any process that changes the genetic composition of a population. So it's not limited to natural selection. We'll look at other mechanisms like mutation and migration and small populations that also change allele gene frequencies. However, genetic variation is the raw material for selection, right? So basically, differences in genes as well as mutation, right? That is going to give us the basis off of which selection can work off of. In general, natural populations do carry quite an amount of genetic variation. So evolution, change is definitely possible. Population geneticists always want to know how much genetic variation is within a population. All right, that way we know the capacity for evolution that a population has. And like a lot of things in biology, that is limited by the available molecular techniques. Before technology, biologists just looked at morphological differences, the phenotypic variation that results from genetic variation. A good example here is blood groups, blood types in humans. There's tons of variation here in just this one trait. There's over 30 genes that can make a difference. A lot of organisms have polymorphic loci, where more than one allele occurs at frequencies that are greater than they would occur in mutation alone. To know if natural selection is occurring, we can check if the allele frequencies in a population are changing. And to do this, we have an equation, Hardy-Weinberg Equilibrium. Right? This is looking at the proportions of genotypes within a population and stating that those proportions will remain stable, will remain constant or the same from generation to generation if 5 assumptions are met. Number 1, no mutation. Number 2, no gene transfer, aka no immigration. Number 3, random mating, completely random. Number 4, population is extremely large, infinite size. And number 5, there is no selection occurring. We can write out the Hardy-Weinberg equation like this: p squared for the frequency of the homozygous dominant allele, right, big B, 2pq for the frequency of the heterozygous alleles, big B, little b, and then q squared for the proportion of homozygous recessive alleles. All this equals 1, right? 100% basically of the population. And we can use this equation to see if allele frequencies and genotype frequencies change over time. And now your book does go into how to solve for various alleles and such, and how this relates to Punnett squares, but don't worry about that for the test. So if all 5 assumptions for equilibrium are met, and there's no mutation, no gene transfer, random mating, population size is big, and no selection, then we would see these allele and genotype frequencies remain unchanged, right? So generation after generation, allele frequencies would be stable. But those assumptions don't seem very realistic, right? And in reality, most populations will not meet all 5 assumptions. So we can use this equation to determine if evolutionary processes are at work, if those frequencies are changing, and if they are, what evolutionary processes might be causing the change. By looking at how deviations are occurring, what changes are occurring, we can suggest hypotheses about what processes might be causing those changes. So, for example, if there's less heterozygous individuals than predicted, well, there's a few possible explanations for that. Maybe natural selection favors homozygous individuals over heterozygous. Maybe individuals are choosing to mate with similar individuals. Maybe there's immigration of homozygous individuals into the population and heterozygous individuals out.